Okay folks, so we've safely joined the River Bure, which we'll be following for the duration of our journey today. And we have just left one of the oldest boatyards on the Broads, which was founded in 1878 by a gentleman called John Lloyds. Now, the boating tourism industry started here over 100 years ago with converted wherries, which are large historic sailing vessels originally used for transporting cargo along the Broadwood villages. But when this work dried up for the wherrymen, they started to take passengers on cruises around the Broads. The River Bure is a tidal waterway that flows for approximately 25 miles further to Great Yarmouth. There it joins a large estuary called Braden Water. And here, along with all the other Broadwood waterways, it flows out to sea. And the Norfolk Broads National Park is made up of 63 shallow lakes called Broads. Only 13 of these are accessible by boat. And we have over 125 miles of navigable river here, with the average river depth being between 10 to 12 feet deep. But the Broads themselves, well, they're only around 2 to 5 feet deep, and the reason for this will become evident when we enter our first Broad today. Coming up very soon on the right hand side, you'll see the Barton House Railway and the Wherry Yacht Charter Trust. 5 of Norfolk's 8 surviving wherries can be found under the awnings here. We have the White Moth, the Olive and the Narada kept here, but we also have 2 pleasure or passenger carrying wherries kept here as well, and their names Hartor and the Ardea. And all of these vessels were built during the early 1900s. Now, the aim of the Wherry Yacht Charter Trust is to maintain these historic vessels and to offer a true sailing experience for Broads visitors. And sometimes we get very lucky and see them out and about on our trips. Barton House Railway, however, was built in 1963 and is still owned by the gentleman who constructed it. It's occasionally open to the public, with all proceeds being given to local charities. And it's a fully functioning miniature steam railway, and even boasts an original signal box taken from Holling Station that dates back to 1901. And you can even have a little go of driving one of the trains when it's open. It's well worth a visit for all you train enthusiasts on board. And so you've probably noticed already, as we move slowly through the village, the beautiful properties on either side of the river. Now, most of these waterside properties are privately owned, and the vast majority of these are occupied all year round. Only a few of the smallest ones are holiday homes. And with very few exceptions, these houses are built from timber. Now, this is to keep the weight of the building down, as the land around here is very soft, especially so by the river. So before building a house in this area, some very deep pilings have to be driven in first, often as far as 90 feet deep, until they find a hard enough surface to build upon. And the vast majority of properties found around here in Wroxham can fetch well over £1 million on the market today, with Brynwood here coming into view very soon on our right hand side, being in excess of £3 million. Now when you see this property, you'll definitely understand why. It has its own boating lake, small bridge, climbing frame, even comes with its own gaggle of geese as well, and 5 acres of land. It's incredible though, isn't it? It's almost as big as my house. Well, house and Mr. don't currently have a climbing frame in my garden. Inside here we have a quaint little property called Leisure Hour. Now this is one of the oldest properties in Wroxham, and when it was built in the early 1900s it was considered something of an eyesore, which I think is a bit of a shame, as it's one of my favourites found here on this part of the river. It's also a holiday let, so you can hire it out for a week or two and watch us drive past your house every single day talking about it. What more could you possibly ask for? And from one of the oldest properties in Wroxham to one of the newest ones, this large white one here again on our left hand side. Construction of this property finished in 2020, and it even has its own outside kitchen, which you never know, they might have used today, but I guarantee they haven't used it too much this year so far. Money well spent, eh? Now, believe it or not, before that property was built, all that used to sit on that little strip of land was an old wooden run-down shack. So I think we can all agree that's a bit of an upgrade, isn't it? And of course, we can't all live in multi-million-pound properties out here on the Norfolk roads. This one coming into view very soon to the right-hand side underneath this willow tree. That was owned by Rivo behind the bar. Looks like you left your front doors open today, Riv. That's never a good sign. In fact, actually looks like someone's run away with one of them. Coming up very soon on the right hand side, just past these last few willow trees, you'll see a property called Riverside. Now this was once owned by the popular entertainer George Formby, known for his comical songs and ukulele accompaniment. But at the time of his ownership, this property was known as Berylbean, after his wife Beryl, who was also his manager. George bought this property originally for just £2,000 and extensively modified it. Nowadays it is valued somewhere in the region of £1.6 million. It has 5 bedrooms and sits on 5 acres of land. And I would like to imagine George writing one of his famous songs whilst cleaning all the windows of that house. And judging from the total silence that joke just got, I can tell we have no George Formby fans on the boat today. Now to the right hand side very soon you'll see 2 Egyptian geese, easily identified by their chocolate brown feathers and a brown ring around their eyes. I'll tell you a bit more about these birds a little bit later on if I spot some more. Okay, so by now you've probably picked out the house you want to buy when you win the lottery. I quite like this large white one coming up to our right hand side. But you may have also noticed so far on our cruise that I point out to you at some point on our journey today. Now, when the rest of the country was using straw as a roofing material, us folk here in Norfolk like to do things just a little bit differently. And the extensive reed beds found here on the Norfolk Broads provided us an excellent alternative to straw. The ridge. Now this is made out of a more pliable plant called sedge, which is able to be bent and shaped to give the roof a distinctive pattern, and it's held in place by willow branches. Now, the sedge is used at the very top of the thatch roof because the reed they use in the main body is very brittle and it doesn't bend over the top. And originally the ridge was used as a signature, and each thatcher has their own unique way of finishing a ridge, much like an artist and their watermark or signature at the bottom of a painting. So, if you were to have a look at these 3 houses coming into view very soon to the right hand side, you would notice that the decorative ridge at the top of each one matches, and that's because the same thatcher carried out all of this work. Now, a thatch roof provides good insulation in the winter, and it's surprisingly cool in the summer, and it will generally last up to 100 years. The ridge at the top will not last quite as long, roughly around 30 years, and the chicken wire that covers some of the roofs, well, that's just there to help protect it from breeding birds looking for nesting material. And say you fancy buying one of these thatched roofed houses around here, and that thatching of yours requires repair, Well, depending on the damage, of course, that could cost you anything up towards 20, 30, maybe even £40,000. Again, depending on the thatcher that you use as well. And that's all considering that you have to buy most of these houses outright around here in Wroxham, particularly ones close to the river's edge. You can't get a mortgage on most of these properties due to the risk of flooding. And I'm just slowing the boat down a fraction because coming into view once again on the right hand side we have another one of my favourite properties found on the river. You'll also get a tiny glimpse of Wroxham Broad just past it. Now we'll be heading on to Wroxham Broad in a few moments' time. But this house was built in 1914 by a vicar who lost his son in World War I, and it was built in tribute to him, which I think was particularly lovely. You'll also notice it's built on stilts, and there's a little cut through that runs directly underneath it straight into Wroxham Broad. Now, I doubt you can get planning permission for that kind of thing nowadays. But that means all the local wildlife can have easy access to the Broad or to the village whenever they like. But unfortunately, we are a little bit too large to fit underneath there. So we're going to have to take the long way round, I'm afraid. But as we leave that last house of the village behind us, we've entered into an area of wet woodland that we'll be seeing for the majority of our journey today. Now originally this entire area would have been completely open and devoid of trees, and this is so the wind could help wherries and other sailing vessels along their way down the river. And it used to be maintained by human intervention. So if there was anything growing that was going to obstruct the wind in any way, very quickly removed, often by children as a punishment. But please, don't get any ideas, okay, parents and guardians, these trees are a little bit too big now. Trees began to take over the riverbanks here when green and sedge stopped being harvested after World War I. And this is when a lot of the country's young lads sadly did not return from the conflict. And due to this lack of labour, the trees began to take over the riverbanks again. And the trees you can see on either side here are mostly made up of alder, willow and birch, which all thrive in the wet woodlands. And this makes an important and perfect habitat for many species of woodland animals. And we've had many sightings of the shy and elusive otter down this stretch of river. So keep an eye out for bubbles on the surface of the water, as this is a sign of an otter's presence. And within the last few weeks as well, we've had some great sightings of kingfishers down this little strip of river as well, from where the village ended and Wroxham Broad begins. And we believe there must be a nest somewhere around here. So once again, keep your eyes open for kingfishers as well. They can practically come out of anywhere, and they fly very low and very fast. Now, in a few moments' time, you'll hear me make a sound signal using the vessel's horn, and you may have heard me make a couple of these noises back in the boatyard earlier. Now, this is just to indicate our intention to alter the boat's course, and we'll be turning right very soon afterwards. You may have noticed that our boats don't have indicator lights to let other river users know that we're going to be turning, so we use the horn to alert them to our presence, and maritime law dictates that we have to use these sound signals. Usually though, holiday makers and dayboat users don't understand why we're using them, and most likely think we're getting impatient with them or turning them off, and this is absolutely not the case. So, one short blast of the horn means we're going to turn to the right or to starboard. Two short blasts means we turn to the left or to port. And if I make three short blasts of the horn, well, that just means we intend to travel backwards. And that is something I'm definitely going to try to avoid doing today, I must say. So here we go, folks. One short blast of the horn incoming. And that means we're going to be turning onto our first board for today, Wroxham Broad. Okay, here we are. Welcome to Wroxham Broad. Now, Broad is a name given to most of the lakes found around here in Norfolk. But the origins of this word is surrounded in mystery. It was thought to originate from an early Anglo-Saxon word for the widening of the river, which is broadinger, though unfortunately this has never been fully proven. Now, as you can see, Wroxham Broad is very large, and it's also very good for sailing. It's about 3/4 of a mile long and 1/4 of a mile wide at its widest point, and it covers around 120 acres. And this roughly translates to around 70 full-sized football pitches. So, our rivers like the Bure are all, of course, naturally formed. But the lakes around here were all man-made, and every inch of Wroxham Broad was dug out by hand, which I think is particularly impressive, isn't it? And it also explains why these lakes are so shallow, being only around 2 to 5 feet deep in general. But seeing as Wroxham Broad is used quite frequently, and is in fact a sailing broad as well, it's more around the 5 to 8 foot deep mark. But there was a very good reason for all this digging around here. Because there was no local coal available, wood was originally used as fuel for cooking and for keeping homes warm and dry. However, this all changed in the 9th century when the Danes invaded and conquered East Anglia. And you may know these people by another name, and that is the Vikings. Now, the Danes saw timber as a particularly precious resource and used it to build boats, ships and houses. And it was around about this time that this area of land was dug out for its peat to be used as a source of fuel. Now, peat is a substance made up of ancient compacted leaf matter, and it was cut into blocks called turfs or a turf and left to dry out. And it was considered a very good source of fuel at the time. Now, the idea of using peat for fuel was not a new invention, having been used by people for millennia. But the Vikings tributed it to the extreme, as you can see from the large area that Wroxham Broad covers. And it was the Vikings who introduced the idea of digging peat in mass production. By the mid-15th century, peat digging had pretty much stopped, and there were two reasons for this: economic and environmental. Coal had become easier to import into this county, and water levels had risen due to tidal surges, storms, and a small amount of climate change, which meant that all these diggings around here in East Anglia had become flooded, creating the Norfolk Broads as we see them today. But it took until the 1960s to prove that the Norfolk Broads were all man-made, when botanist Dr. Joyce Lambert fired her research into it. Before that, it was believed they were all naturally formed due to glacial movements during the last ice age. Coming up to the right-hand side very soon, you'll see the Mississippi paddle boat, which is stationed in Horning, one of our one of the best pastimes to enjoy on the Norfolk Broads, and something he's actually quite famous for, is of course sailing. And just past the Mississippi paddle boat there to the right-hand side, you'll see the Norfolk Broad Yacht Club. Now, this yacht club has been here since 1938, when 4 smaller clubs came together, and it now has over 1,500 members. And it offers a variety of sailing activities for the complete novice to the more experienced sailor. The club holds races here every weekend from Easter till the end of October, but the last week of July is a very important date on their calendar. It is known as Wroxham Week, and hundreds of boats turn up to take part or to spectate in the races held here every day of that week. And it has quite a bit of historical significance too, as it was once known as the Wroxham Water Frolic, which I think sounds amazing, and they really need to start using that word a lot more nowadays, don't they? Frolic. And there's been a regatta held here on this spot since 1888, which is a little bit like a village fair, but held on the Broad itself. Now, unfortunately, 2020 was the only year that the regatta was ever cancelled in its entire history due to the pandemic, and it was even held during both of the World Wars. And we've been very glad to see it return to Wroxham Broad for the last few years. And those of you on the left-hand side might notice that we are now approaching a very large black cloaked vessel. And you can just see it ahead of us there to the left. Now this is a very fine example of a Norfolk wherry. Her name is the Solace, and she was built in 1903 as a little village called Wroxham on the River Yare. Now up until the mid-1800s there were more than 600 wherries trading on the Broads. Nowadays there's only 8 surviving wherries left here in Norfolk, so seeing just one of that number is something a little bit special in my opinion. But don't worry if you can't quite see her at the moment, because very soon we'll get a lovely close-up view of the Solace on the right-hand side. Now the Solace is a passenger carrying or pleasure wherry. She's 60 foot long, weighs about 40 tonnes, and carries a single sail of approximately 1,400 square feet. If you have a look right at the top of her mast, not only you see her name, the Solace, which makes identifying her a little bit easier for me, but you also see a red flag flying. Well, that's called the Jenny Morgan flag, and it's named after a character from an old Norfolk folk song. This small flag acts as an indicator to show the speed and direction of the wind. The skipper would know the best way to set their sail by watching this flag's movements. And as we slowly go past the Solace, have a look right at the front of her, and you might notice there's a white patch on her bow. Well, that's called white nosing, an orbital to the skippers, and lanterns posed a fire hazard on a boat made purely of timber. Pleasure wherries like the Solace carried a white sail, but the original trading wherries carried a black one. So with a black hull and a black sail, they were very difficult to spot in the dark. So using a white patch at the front made them just a little bit more visible, and therefore less likely to have collisions. Now since being built, Solace has remained in private ownership and has been owned by 3 families in that time. And it's thought that she was originally built as a trading wherry, but was converted partway through her construction as the use of trading wherries was coming to an end due to the establishment of the steam railways for transporting cargo. And if you just look past the Solace to the right hand side, and in the corner of the Broad you might see a mute swan, and with that swan there's a couple of cygnets, or baby swans if you prefer to say that. Hopefully we might get a couple more views of cygnets somewhere on the river today. Now back in the village I mentioned that I'd be able to show you an example of a reed bed, and on our right hand side here you can see a very small example of one, and there's an even smaller one on the left hand side just right of that dredger, the orange dredger, and the little break in the trees. Now larger reed beds than these are still harvested on the Broads today, just not in the vast quantities that they were over 100 years ago. And that's because 85% of the reed that we use in this country nowadays comes from overseas, from countries such as China, Turkey and Poland, which I always think is a little bit of a shame, because the reed that grows here in Norfolk is reputed to be of very high quality for thatching. But unfortunately, thatching is now a dying trade. Now, when reed is harvested, it can't be cut until it's completely dried out. And that means the cutting doesn't normally start until December, and it finishes around April the following year when the reeds start to regrow. And to this day, reed is still harvested by hand. And that's because no one has managed to invent a machine that can deal with the swampy mud that surrounds their roots. Now, I'm just going to pause here because we have a very iconic bird of the Norfolk Wars to the right hand side. And it's just decided to fly off just so I wanted to speak about it. Typical. Oh, it's going to land a little bit further along to the right. That's of course a grey heron. They can usually be found at the river's edge, where they like to hunt for fish and other small critters. They're not particularly fussy about what they eat either. They pretty much eat anything, or at least attempt to. And around here in Norfolk, grey herons are generally called hunters, which is an old Norfolk word which describes something that is very tall and very thin. We also have one of our sister vessels coming down our left-hand side very soon, folks, and that is the vintage Wroxham. As we go past, give everyone on board a great big wave. Make it look like you're enjoying yourselves, folks. Come on, let's be having you. Now, when the reed beds around here start to regrow, they perform two vital roles. And the first is to help protect the riverbanks from erosion. Now, if a boat is speeding, the wash or wave created by it hits the bank and erodes away at the soil around tree roots. Eventually, the trees will become unstable and would likely fall into the river, damaging the bank and blocking the right of navigation. So, wherever reeds grow along the bank, they absorb these waves like a natural buffer, so that the very soft riverbanks can't be eroded. And this is one of the reasons why we have such low speed limits here on the Norfolk Broads, because excess speed from boats in particular will very rapidly destroy all these riverbanks. Now, whilst we're inside the village, it was just 4 miles per hour. But hold on to your hats, folks, because out here on the open rivers, we can really unleash the power of these engines. And it is a whopping 5 miles per hour. Woo! And of course, the second role of reed beds, like the ones coming up to the right-hand side, is a very important habitat for wildlife. Now, the Norfolk Broads is home to 26% of the UK's rarest species, and many of them live right here amongst the reeds and the trees. Now, this includes the bittern, which is a bird from the same family as the grey heron that you saw a few moments ago, but it's brown in colour and a bit smaller. We have the Norfolk hawker dragonfly here as well, which is the UK's 6th largest dragonfly, and the swallowtail butterfly, which is Britain's largest and rarest butterfly, which can only be found around here on the Norfolk Broads and nowhere else in the country. But just briefly returning to the bittern, it's very unlikely you'll see one of these birds today, I'm afraid. There's only around 40 to 60 breeding pairs of bitterns left in the entire of the UK due to habitat loss. But a lot of that number can be found around here. But I've been with Royal Stores for 5 years now. This is my 5th season on the river. And during peak summertime, I spend most of my time on the river, going up and down at least twice a day. And in all that time combined, I've only ever seen 3 bitterns, which just goes to show how rare these birds really are. Now, take a look on the right-hand side, and very soon you might get a little glimpse of a secret broad. Now, this tiny broad is called the Polk, and it's only visible now because the trees that divide it from the river were cut down to their stumps a few years ago. This is a process known as coppicing, and as you'll see very soon, I'll stop talking about the Polk, because these trees have pretty much regrown. People used to hire rowboats from the farmer who used to own this broad over 100 years ago. And the Polk is less than 1 metre deep, and that's something I can tell quite easily due to the vast amount of water lilies growing on it. Now, there's a little break in the trees here on the right-hand side, and you'll get a lovely view of the Polk and hundreds of these beautiful plants. Don't worry if you can't see any water lilies at all, because there's plenty on either side of the river at the river's edge. Now, water lilies will only grow in the very shallowest, but also the cleanest of water. And this brings us quite nicely onto our next subject today, the environmental health of the Broads. Because you may be surprised to know that the Norfolk Broads didn't always used to look this beautiful. Now, well, the health of the Broads started to decline during the 1900s, but it reached its peak in the 1980s. During this time, there were more than 2,000 cruisers available to hire, and most of these were using hazardous paint to protect their hulls, which contaminated the water. Thankfully, though, this practice is now banned. Also, the way we dispose of sewage and the methods used by farmers to fertilise the land at the time led to high levels of phosphorus and nitrogen leaching into the river. And this caused an enrichment of the waterways that resulted in too much plant growth, in particular, algae. Now, algae is a single-cell plant that can grow rapidly if nutrients in the water become too high. Too much algae growth in the Broads created a toxic problem for both humans and animals. And as the algae covered the surface of the water, oxygen levels also began to fall, which in turn damaged fish stocks and killed off all the other plants. So back then in the 80s, you would have seen any of these water lilies growing here on our left-hand side, and this was beginning to have a negative impact on the rest of the ecosystem, and drastic changes were desperately needed. Thankfully though, these changes came into effect with the formation of the Broads Authority. This organisation was established in 1989 to help maintain the Broads, and it has adequate powers and resources to manage both the land and the water in this area. And in 1988, the government passed the Broads Act, which gave the Norfolk Broads the same status as a national park. And this, along with changes to sewage disposal and cooperation with farmers, has thankfully helped to revert the Norfolk Broads back to an area of natural beauty. And speaking of natural beauty, we have another tiny broad coming up to the right-hand side. Now this one's called Sow House Little Broad, and it is the little sister of Sow House Broad, which we will see very soon on our journey today. It's also very shallow, something you can tell again from all the water that is currently growing on it. And it's privately owned by the Cater family, who also own Sow House Broad as well. But I'll talk a little bit more about this family later on. But as Sow House Little Broad is privately owned, like many other Broads around here, its water is left practically undisturbed, making it an ideal haven for all kinds of wildlife. You may have also noticed the size difference between these two smaller Broads we just passed and Wroxham Broad, which we were on earlier. Well, that's because Wroxham Broad was used as a mass production base for peat, and that peat would have been used all over the county, especially in Norwich. But these smaller Broads around here, well, they would have been almost like private Broads from the very beginning. They would have been used by maybe a family, settlement or village as their own personal supply of peat. And that's the reason why they're so small. And over time, they've not been used as much as the larger Broads around here, and they've silted up and become very shallow. Now, you wouldn't know it, but as we've been travelling down the river on our trip today, we'll be skirting around the edges of a huge Broad that is slightly bigger than Wroxham Broad, and it's on our left-hand side. Now, unfortunately you can't see it at the moment because it's hidden by the trees, but it's called Halton Great Broad, and the moorings for its nature trail can also be found coming up on our left. Now, Halton Great Broad Nature Trail is a site of special scientific interest, and it's managed by Natural England. It's only accessible by boat, and it has a warden on site who can give you a bit more information about the many types of animals and plants found around here. And the best thing about this beautiful spot is the fact that it's completely free admission. So, if you ever have maybe a spare hour or two around here, and of course have access to a boat, which you could easily hire for the day or maybe even for a few hours from a local boatyard, then I can highly recommend coming out here and checking out Halton Great Broad's Nature Trail whilst you're at it. But the Broad itself has been close to navigation by boat since the early 1900s, when it silted up and became very shallow, and it has now become home to some of the rarest and shyest of species found around here. Of particular interest is the arrival of the common terns in April. These small birds fly all the way from South Africa to nest on Halton Great Broad on specially made platforms built just for them to lay their eggs on. During my time here at Broad's Tours, I've had some wonderful wildlife experiences on Houghton Great Broad and its nature trail. A few years ago I spotted a water vole there, which was only a matter of feet away from me. I could have picked it up if I wanted to, but I didn't. Water voles are very rare and highly protected in this country, but it was great to see one close up. I've seen kingfishers and otters in this vicinity quite frequently as well, and there's even been sightings of ospreys hunting for fish on Houghton Great Broad. Now, ospreys are a large bird of prey, but are incredibly rare in this country. In fact, I've never seen one. I believe most of the numbers can be found around Scotland and Wales, so I can highly recommend popping down to Houghton Great Broad and its nature trail if you get the chance, because you never know, you might see something particularly special. In fact, there has been spotted at Ranworth Broad a pair of ospreys. Now, we're really hoping they become a breeding pair. If this actually happens, it'll be the first time that ospreys have bred in this county for over 210 years. So we're very hopeful it'll happen, and looking forward to it if it does. And once again, very soon, I'll make another sound signal. One short blast the horn. And that of course means we're going to be turning right onto our second broad for today, Southhouse Broad. Now, I said earlier on that I was hoping we'd see some more cygnets on our trip today, and I hope that's actually happened. And we've got some coming down the right-hand side very soon. Now, these are mute swans and they're cygnets, and these birds are protected by the crown, and this has been the case since the 12th century. One person in history was particularly fond of these birds, and his name was King Henry VIII. No, he wasn't some great big conservationist, I'm afraid. He liked to eat swans, and he was particularly partial to them being on his dinner plate king. Okay, welcome to Southhouse Broad. As you can see, this broad is a lot smaller than Wroxham Broad, but it's still very popular for visitors arriving either by boat or from a short half-a-mile walk from its car park, which will take you through ancient oak woodland. Now, in peak summertime, this broad is absolutely packed with boats moored up along its extensive moorings, and it provides a lovely place for kids to run around, for barbecues, and for dogs to be walked. I've hired a canoe from the wardens at station here, and I can tell you it's a great experience for anyone who wants to get an even closer look at the wildlife. And believe it or not, even more adventurous people might even venture for a paddle or a swim from the sandy beach to our left. And this brings us on to Southhouse Broad's creation. Most broads, as I mentioned earlier, were dug out for their peat. But Southhouse Broad is an exception to the rule and was dug in the 9th century for its gravel and sand. And this was intended as building materials for churches, halls and other buildings of high importance. Now, on either side of the boat you might see some elegant looking water birds with orange plumage on the back of their heads, a fairly long neck and a white chest. We had two go down the left hand side and there's one to the right hand side as well. We've got another two to the left ahead of us. Well, these are great crested grebes, and they look very exotic, but they are in fact native to Britain, and they are very, very distantly related to the penguin. And that's because they have their legs quite far back on their bodies, which makes them very cumbersome on land, but adapted to life perfectly on the water. Like the penguin, they are a diving bird. They'll hunt for fish and other small critters, and can spend around 15 seconds underneath the water. To the left of us, ahead of us there as well, and soon to be on the right hand side, you'll see an example of alder carr woodland. Now, alder is the type of tree that's growing here, but carr is a Norse word which means wet woodland, and you can find this type of habitat primarily around here on the Norfolk Broads. It's almost as if it's our very own mangrove swamp or jungle. And in springtime, and this time of year as well, it provides an excellent shelter for many species of wild nesting birds. Now, we have two more great crested grebes coming up to the right hand side, but if you can see them, you would notice that one of them has a second head. And I'm not even joking. Now, that's because it's carrying a chick on its back. If you have a look at the back of this furthest bird from us, to the right hand side, you might see a little zebra-striped headed chick poking out. Now, when these birds hatch, the chicks, you can see they're quite small. I would say this one is only maybe about 5 days old now. And they can swim, but they get exhausted quite quickly. And so they hitch a ride on the back of the parental birds, just like this, which is always great to see. Hopefully you got some lovely views there. Now I will turn the boat around a little bit later on, and we'll try and find them again and show you on the left hand side next time as well, if I can. Obviously it's wildlife, I can't guarantee anything. Now, a few years ago the Water Authority wanted to remove this area of wetland to our right hand side here, and then they realised just how good it was for the wildlife, and they decided to keep it, which is great news as well. Now, a little bit further along, we have another view of a great crested grebe. If you haven't seen one so far on today's trip, again to the right hand side. Keep your eyes to the right hand side, because as I turn the boat you'll see a rather large vessel moored up at the side of the Broad, covered in a black tarpaulin. Now, this is called a whaleback. It's an old World War II supply boat. It was raised very close to where Horning is, which is the next village along down the river. And they're hoping to restore it to its original condition, but they're just keeping it here for the time being. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Sow House Broad, because it's quite an important broad. It's privately owned by the Katie family, who I mentioned earlier. And that makes it a private broad, but they open it out to the public out of the goodness of their own hearts. And all the money that's generated from the mooring fees, the boats, the canoes, the car park, that all goes back into the conservation and maintenance of Sow House Broad, which not only makes it very popular for the tourists and visitors. As you can see, it's still quite a busy day on Sow House Broad today, but it's even busier during peak summertime, when there's hundreds of tourists enjoying the water. I practically have to dodge beach balls and inflatables at that time of year. It's also popular for the wildlife around here. So I can highly recommend popping down to Sow House Broad if you get the chance. It's only a short 10-minute drive from Wroxham after all, and then from the car park to the Broad it's again another short 10-minute walk through the ancient oak woodlands. The entrance you'll see to the right hand side very soon, very accessible, perfect for wheelchairs, pushchairs, buggies, you name it. And I can also tell you there's plenty of wildlife to be seen in that ancient oak woodland, because I've been through it. Spend a little bit of time here on Sow House Broad and you might see something special. It's another great hotspot for kingfishers and otters. You'll be surprised the amount of times I've gone past this area of wet woodland to our left hand side and a kingfisher has just shot out from the trees. Obviously I'm trying to talk it up at the moment, but it isn't happening, it seems. You might get another great view of some great crested grebes. Now, we have that family coming down the left hand side very soon, folks. So hopefully you'll get a lovely view of these beautiful birds and the little tiny chick that's poking out, still poking out from the back of the one that's furthest to the left. Now, great crested grebes are one of my favourite birds found around here, but during the Victorian age, or 1800s, these birds were very rare in Britain indeed. They were almost hunted to extinction. They were highly prized for those decorative orange feathers that they have on the back of their heads, and department stores were ordering thousands of tons worth of great crested grebe feathers every single year to be used in items of clothing. Well, a group of ladies decided to go out and try to save these beautiful birds, and what they did was very clever. They essentially went out and kidnapped a load of great crested grebes, and they hid them. They put them in their ponds, in their bathtubs, in their buckets, absolutely everywhere. But by doing this, they managed to save the great crested grebe. Now, this group of ladies were called the fur, feather and fin folk, which I have to admit is a little bit of a mouthful. But our society eventually evolved into the RSPB today. So I think that's a wonderful story, isn't it? Potentially like the great crested grebe, we have some more. To the right hand side here, we wouldn't have the RSPB today. Now, there's also been great sightings of red kites flying above the trees just ahead of us here. Now, red kites, like the osprey, are a large bird of prey, but aren't very common in this county at the moment. Like all birds of prey, they were decimated during the 70s, 80s and 90s as they were thought to hunt livestock. Thankfully though, that's all changed now, and the knowledge is better, and the numbers are starting to increase. Although unfortunately it doesn't look like we have any red kites ahead of us at the moment, but like the kingfisher, they can appear at any second, so keep your eyes just scanning the tree lines. You never know, you might even fancy a little paddle or a swim from the sandy beach we just passed there to the right hand side. And I have to admit, it looks very inviting today. Though a few weeks ago I did fall in the water, not willingly of course, and I can tell you that it's still quite chilly. So I'll probably wait a few weeks until the adventure in if I were you. And lo and behold, we have a red kite just soaring above the trees, just ahead of us, slightly to the left. You can see it ahead of us here, folks. Some of you might actually get a glimpse there. Now I can tell it's a red kite due to the shape of its tail. It's got what we call like a crescent moon shaped tail, or an inverted tail. It's just above the trees, just duck down a little bit to the left hand side. Okay, hopefully you all enjoyed having a look around Sow House Broad there, and I hope I've even encouraged you to come back and check it out for yourselves, because it is well worth a visit. You can have a great little adventure around here, particularly if you take out one of the canoes or kayaks. But now, unfortunately, it's time for us to leave Sow House Broad. So very soon I'll make one short blast of horn, and that just means we're going to rejoin the river, and we'll continue on our journey down towards Didler's Mill. Now, as we join the river here, I'd like to talk about a bird that I've mentioned a few times today. I haven't seen yet, but I guess you guys are all eagerly awaiting. And that is, of course, a kingfisher. Now, I can't guarantee you a kingfisher, I'm afraid. I wish that I could. I love to see these birds myself. But what I can do is point out some of the best places for them, so you're a bit better prepared. So as we join the river here, have a look to the right-hand side. We see a large area of shallow water with hundreds of water lilies growing on it. That's a great place for kingfishers. Small fish like to hide in shallow water and underneath water lilies, and of course, a kingfisher would love to hunt for them. Now, one thing I must mention about these elusive birds is there's absolutely no point looking right at the tops of the trees for a kingfisher. They will not be there. What you're looking for is low-lying branches and stumps protruding out of the water, like what we have here to the right-hand side. And there's many areas like this as we travel down the river from this point onwards. Like the left-hand side here as well, another great spot for kingfishers. Areas I like to call Kingfisher Coves. So as we travel down this point, as we travel down the river from this point onwards, keep your eyes peeled, folks, because you never know, we might just be in luck today. Now, it's around here, when the wildlife tends to hide away from me, that I like to mention a topic that interests me and also relates to the Norfolk Broads, and that is Norfolk myths and folklore. Now, Norfolk is a very ancient county, having been inhabited by people for millennia, from the Stone Age to the Viking Age, all the way up to the present day. So naturally, it's fair to assume we have a very, very rich mythological background to draw from. And you wouldn't be wrong. From demon dogs, ghosts and ghouls, Norfolk has it all. So here are a few stories that might be of interest. Now, in East Anglia, we have a particularly famous local creature, or supernatural being, and his name is the Black Shuck. Tales of this spooky beast have been collected from all across the county, with the most famous case relating to a small village called Blythburgh in Suffolk. Typically reported sightings of black shuck describe a large black shaggy dog as big as a cow, with wickedly yellow piercing eyes. But there are many different variants to his description though, such as the shuck that reportedly haunts and crosses Coltshall Bridge every night at midnight, which is supposedly headless. Now, Coltshall is only a short 10-minute drive up the river by car from where Wroxham is, so if you fancy going there tonight, hiding around the bridge to spot the shuck that reportedly haunts it, well, that's exactly where it is, and very good luck to you because you're going to need it. The name shuck is thought to have come from the Anglo-Saxon word for devil, which is sucker, and it's easy to understand why this is so with the various descriptions of this dark devil dog. But Sow shuck, which reportedly stalks the lonely country roads and undergrowth around this area, apparently just has one blazing yellow eye in the centre of its forehead. Witnesses have described a sulphurous smell and sudden gusts of winds knocking them off their feet, which makes these encounters even more terrifying. So, if you're ever around here on a lonely road at night and you hear a howl or a growl nearby, do not stop walking. Sightings of black shuck are generally regarded as a very bad omen, with misfortune befalling the poor victim shortly after its appearance. Another peculiar occurrence from around here relates to Wroxham Broad. There have been numerous reports since the 1600s of people being on Wroxham Broad and strange events happening to them. Swimmers and sailors alike have been enjoying the Broad one moment and then found themselves standing amongst Romans in the next. Every separate story recounts the same or similar events, with hapless time travellers being transported to a Roman amphitheatre, with baying crowds, processions of Roman generals and soldiers, and rows of slaves shackled in chains. Some stories start with the witnesses being challenged by a very grumpy old man, who, to be fair, sounds a lot like my manager. But that grumpy old man will suddenly transform before their eyes into a regal Roman commander. Now, if there was just one reported case of this incident, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the witnesses had been daydreaming. Seeing as I've seen at least 6 reported cases of this strange event occurring since 1603, all of which mentions Romans parading on Wroxham Broad hundreds of years after the Roman occupation of Britain has ended. This makes this story even more mysterious. Now, you may have seen 2 more cygnets going past the left-hand side. Hopefully you've got another great view of these birds. And our last curious story for today comes from a small village called Ludden, which can be found a little bit further down the river from where our trip ends. Now, in 1782, this village apparently came under assault from a worm or dragon. This large beast, according to eyewitnesses, had a very long snout and 2 large horns on the top of its head. Now, being very reclusive, the dragon spent most of its time hiding in tunnels around the village, but it spent the night terrorising the neighbourhood. After it seriously wounded a man, a brave villager waited until the dragon was away hunting cattle and blocked the entrances to its home. On its return, the dragon flew into a rage and headed off towards nearby St Benet's Abbey, flying through the gatehouse and into an underground vault, where apparently it lies slumbering to this day. And I hope that everyone has a lovely night's sleep after all those creepy stories. Shortly coming up on our right hand side here, you'll see Woodbastwick Staife. Now, Staife is a local word deriving from Norse, which roughly translates to loading area. And during the days of waterborne transport, every Broadland village had a staife or landing place like this one, where wherries can take on or discharge cargo. This one is again privately owned by the Cater family, who I've spoken a bit about today. But as you can see, the real owners of the staife are the geese. Now the Cater family, if you remember, they own Sow House Little Broad, Sow House Broad as well, but also a vast amount of land on our right hand side here, including the entire village of Wood Baswick, other than one house. Just imagine that, owning practically an entire village. So if you want to live in Wood Baswick, you have to rent your property from this very rich family. Now Wood Baswick is also home to the Woodfords Brewery, which produces some excellent ales and beers, two of which you can try on the boat today. We have the Wherry, which is a typical session bitter, and the Blue Gold, which is a slightly stronger golden ale, and is my personal and highly recommended favourite. Now these ales are truly the taste of Norfolk. And this long straight stretch of river that we're currently travelling down is called Wood Baswick Reach. And as you can see, there's a big difference on the banks of the river on either side. Now on the left hand side here we have the usual wet woodland that we've been seeing for the majority of our journey today, whilst on the right hand side we have more extensive reed beds. Now the right hand side of the river is very close to how the entire Broads and rivers would have looked over 100 years ago. Just imagine that the trees you can see that are quite close to us here, they're way off in the distance, and between us and the trees there's nothing but reed beds. Now the right hand side of the river has been extensively managed and maintained in recent years, keeping the encroaching trees at bay. This is the process I mentioned earlier known as coppicing, where invasive trees are cut regularly down to their stumps, leaving the reed free to grow unhindered. And this is another one of the best places to spot those elusive kingfishers that we have around here. Now kingfishers can fly up to 30 miles per hour, so you really need to keep your wits about you and remain focused if you'd like to catch a glimpse of one, I'm afraid. And again, don't forget about the kingfisher homes around here, because there's still plenty of them on the left hand side. Keep your eyes peeled for a small bright blue flash about the size of a tennis ball flying very low and fast along the river, or hiding amongst the reeds to our right hand side. And of course we can't talk about the Norfolk Broads without also briefly mentioning fishing. Now we have some great coarse fishing here on these rivers.